Without a doubt, Pretty Woman was undisputedly Julia Roberts at her funniest, sexiest, and most charismatic. And I say this even though one of my best friends absolutely cannot stand her or her acting in any movie she's been in. I, on the other hand, am a good appreciator of Julia Roberts and her charm. And when I got around to finishing my rewatch of Pretty Woman, it took a couple of minutes, almost 15, for it to hit me that this film actually succeeded in making me forget just how terrifying the concept of it is. And it was all because of Julia's charm and Richard's calm. If this is your first time catching my videos or this series, hello, I'm Noria and welcome back to Romcom Ganda Tuesdays, a video series where I watch or rewatch rom-coms from the late 80s to early 2010s just to see how well they held up and the messaging that flew over our heads when we were much younger. If you like the series or anything I have to say, do consider hitting the like button, subscribe and turn on notifications, and check out my Ramkonganda playlist for more content in the vein of this one. Or consider this an encouragement for you to rewatch old movies through your adult lenses to see if they are still as beloved as they were from back when you were a child. And yes, I was a child for the first time I watched this movie. Now, if you just immediately had the thought of, Noria, what on earth was a 9 to 10-year-old doing watching Pretty Woman at the turn of the millennia? Well, what can I say? My parents weren't so strict with the movies I watched. All my mother did was ensure that when it came to the sex bits, I had my eyes closed. But other than that, I could basically watch anything I wanted. And let me tell you, it made watching some movies a very disjointed experience. Also, can you believe it that Pretty Woman is 35 years old? God damn. What is time? But before I delve into my thoughts about the film and the many, many ways in which it uses our fantasy of a Cinderella fairy tale mixed in with a big helping of Pygmalion to forget some of the more sus choices made in the film that should have us very concerned about certain characters, a quick thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I've been doing this full time since the start of the year when I've been out of paid employment. And a special shout out to Lena and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses too. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that said, let's move on to the synopsis of the movie. Remember, there are timestamps available so you can just navigate this video as you so choose. Pretty Woman opens at a high-class party with its attendants all looking forward to seeing the man of the hour, Edward Lewis, played by Richard Gere, a man famed for his shark-like tendencies as a pretty successful corporate raider whose job it is to buy struggling businesses for pretty cheap and then sell them for parts in order to make a killing profits-wise for his partners and those who work for him, and they love him for that. Edward at the party, however, is all business except for when he takes a brief moment to accept a phone call from his girlfriend Jessica, who quickly becomes an ex-girlfriend as she breaks up with him, not like Edward is remotely sad about that. Instead, he would like to head back to his room at the Regent Beverly Wilshire Hotel, but unfortunately, his limo is strapped behind several parked cars, and so he grabs the keys from his lawyer and friend Philip and drives off, although it's not a smooth ride since Edward really cannot drive. At the same moment, we're introduced to the character of Vivian Ward, played by Julia Roberts, a sex worker whose roommate Kit recently used their rent money to pay off a pimp/loan shark who she does drugs with. Vivian is pissed, but Kit is her friend, and they both hit the Hollywood Boulevard with the hope that they would be able to score a John for the night. And that is when Edward screeches in on the car that he can't really drive and catches Vivian's attention. She walks up to him thinking he stopped to pick up a sex worker for the night. Edward asks for directions instead. She does one better and offers to show him the way for the high price of $10. Edward is impressed by her negotiation skills and agrees. And whilst on their drive, Vivian basically talks about cars and her interest in them and lights up in such a great way that at some point she ends up swapping places with Edward, who asks her to drive, and boy does she floor it. When they arrive at the hotel, Edward, on a whim, asks Vivian to spend the night with him, not to have sex with her, but just to talk, and he offers to pay her. She charges him a whooping $300 for a night, which he agrees to because, duh, is made of money. Amidst all the conversation that night, though, Vivian notices Edward looking at her and initiates sex with him, which he agrees with and goes along with. Now, the next morning, Edward, after a conversation with Philip, who mentions that the company that they are looking to buy for cheap and that they have been working at acquiring for the last 6 months, has a somewhat old-fashioned CEO, Jim Morse, who wants to meet with Edward for lunch to talk, and it would be best if Edward be at the meeting with a date. Edward, considering that and the time he spent with Vivian so far, which he has enjoyed because she is smart and witty and conscientious without doing any drugs, clearly he has a high respect and regard for sex workers who floss their teeth. Edward propositions Vivian and asks her to stay with him a week, saying that he has a series of upcoming business meetings and that he would need an escort for that and would pay her for her time day and night. Vivian agrees, once again making a killing. Edward, though, wants her to buy appropriate clothes and gives her money to go shopping. However, when Vivian gets to Rodeo Drive and tries to shop there, she's met with a bunch of rude saleswomen who clock her as a sex worker and do not believe that she can afford their wares and ask her to leave. She heads back to the hotel, dejected at having failed the simple request that Edward had made of her, and runs into hotel manager Joe. Sorry, I meant Barney. Like, come on though. He basically plays the exact same character in The Princess Diaries. Can you blame me? Anyway, Barney, who initially was quite disapproving of Vivian and her sex worker attire, after having listened to her and learning what the problem is, sends her off to a store run by a friend of his to have her take care of Vivian's clothing needs. And afterwards, when Vivian comes to him for some more help, it teaches her table etiquette. Remember, they are going to dinner. Later that evening, when Edward shows up, he is surprised to see the transformation with Vivian, who is all dressed up. They head over to dinner with Jim Morse, the owner of the shipbuilding company that Edward wants to buy and strip for parts, and his grandson, David. Jim is charmed by Vivian, but he and Edward come to a head and Jim eventually storms off. Vivian deduces that even though the dinner didn't go as planned, it is clear that Edward thinks highly of Jim and his fighting spirit. And Edward lets down his guard to tell her about his piece of shit father, whose company was the second one that Edward had stripped for parts and utterly decimated. Whilst watching this part, my vindictive ass legit went, "Go, Edward!" And then there's this bit where Edward basically takes Vivian on the shopping spree, and we get the iconic "Pretty woman walking down the street, pretty woman, I kinda like to meet pretty woman." Like, iconic song by Roy Orbison, and also has one of my favorite scenes in movies, which was the old, I was here last time, you refused to sell to me? You get paid on commission, right? Big mistake. Huge. Bye-bye now. Like, oh, so good. Now, a couple of days later, Edward takes Vivian to a polo match where she's clearly having a great time. Philip, meanwhile, sees her, and since he's already started seeing subtle changes in Edward, who isn't acting as shark-like as is known to be, the Edward that used to make them a bajillion amount of money, automatically assumes that Vivian is a spy for Jim Morse, especially after seeing her laughing and chatting with David, Jim's grandson, who she had met when they were at dinner. Edward, to get Philip off his back and because his dumbass was feeling slightly jealous, blurts out that Vivian can't be a spy sent by the Morses, as she's a hooker he picked up on Hollywood Boulevard in Philip's own car. Philip is delighted at this information, and his slimy ass approaches Vivian afterwards to proposition her. Vivian is rightfully infuriated and challenges Edward when they get back to the hotel, who doesn't really understand why she's so upset and tries to weasel out of it. But she declares that she's done and asks for her money, and Edward, the dunderhead, doesn't even hand her the money. Like, he doesn't give the money to her and just throws it on the couch. That act of disrespect has Vivian so pissed that she walks out of the penthouse and waits for the lift to come get her so she can leave. But Edward, who noticed that she was so pissed that she didn't even take the money, comes out to stop her and apologize, admitting that he shouldn't have told Philip about her work, thus opening her up to his shitty behavior, and also admits that he did so because he had been jealous of David. Afterwards, he and Vivian make up. He flies her via private jet to go see the opera, which is where we get the iconic Julia Roberts in red dress that just brought me to my knees. God damn. Vivian is moved at the performance, and when they get back to the hotel, she breaks her no kissing the Johns rule by kissing Edward, after which they have sex, and afterwards she blurts out that she loves him just as she falls asleep. Edward overhears her, and with the week almost finished, he offers her a condo, an allowance, and makes plans to visit her regularly. But Vivian doesn't want any of that, pointing out that it makes her feel like a prostitute. And when Edward is like, that's what you are, she is once again rightfully pissed. And then he asks her what she wants then. And she shares her childhood dream of when she was locked up by her mother in the attic, she would dream of a prince riding his steed with sword held high to come rescue her. She wants to be rescued and not treated like a prostitute. Edward, unfortunately, cannot do the romance stuff, and they are at an impasse. Whilst all of this is happening, Edward has been skipping work to spend time with Vivian, which is slowly pissing off Philip. And then things come to a head when in the meeting when they are meant to seal the deal to acquire Jim Moss's company, Edward instead has a private conversation with Jim where instead he becomes partner with him so that they can build ships together. This sends Philip off the rails, who heads to the hotel. Unfortunately, Edward is not at home, and Philip decides to take his anger on Vivian, attempting to, trigger warning, rape her. But thankfully, Edward shows up in time, pulls Philip off of her, and punches him in the face when Philip attempts to mouth off. And then afterwards, he breaks up his partnership with Philip. Edward afterwards goes in to take care of Vivian. After he's done with his business in LA, Edward asks Vivian to spend one more night with him, but only if she truly wants to and not because he's paying her. But Vivian gently turns him down and walks away. She returns to her apartment and packs up her things as she plans to move to San Francisco. She encourages her friend and roommate Kit to pursue her own dreams, giving her some of the money that Edward had paid her for the week with him, which Kit decides to use to take beauty classes, as she tells another sex worker who is interested in taking up Vivian's half of the rent. Edward, meanwhile, quite clearly and visibly missing Vivian, and thanks to Barney, who hints him at how to track down her apartment, he heads over to her, stopping by to get flowers, and with an umbrella in hand, Edward Lewis, who is terrified of heights, mind you, climbs up the fire escape to Vivian's apartment, her knight in shiny armor, there to rescue her. And when he asks her what happens after the knight has done the rescuing, she responds that she rescues him right back, and then they kiss. The end. A sweet ending, isn't it? And trust me, I too was carried away for so long that I was blinded to the fact that this film at its core does present a relationship dynamic that is quite worrying when you consider the imbalance inherent in Vivian and Edward's relationship. I mean, when we start the movie, it's by meeting Edward, who is fully in shark mode. His sole focus is on work and the latest acquisition that he's gone in for, to the extent that he sounds utterly emotionally distant from his girlfriend Jessica, who then breaks up with him after having informed him that she spoke more to his secretary than she did to him. Edward doesn't even blink and just coldly tells her to have her things out of his apartment immediately, and that is that. And I remember being taken aback when that happened and automatically filing Edward under the "what a dick" category. And this even more so when his other ex, who is also at the party, informs him of her marriage and echoed Jessica's words that she did speak to his secretary more than she did to him. After all, why did she ask said secretary to be her bridesmaid? What the start of the film established for us was the fact that Edward as a character is someone who is quite capable of being so completely lost in his work that the women who are partnered with him felt neglected by him and believed that they came only second to his work. Like, Jessica reminds him she basically felt like she's at his beck and call. And whilst Edward doesn't believe that he's ever treated her that way, we see that actually play out in his relationship with Vivian. And I know you're about to say, but Noria, they do have a business arrangement and Edward is paying Vivian for her time with him. So it does make sense that a lot of their relationship is based on him informing her of the places he needs her to be at with him, and Vivian overhauling her entire wardrobe in order to be respectable when she's there with him. Being at his beck and call is justified. And you know what? Yes, you're right about that. My problem and worry, however, is the fact that that is how their relationship started. Theirs is a love that started off as a transaction, and it's going to be extremely hard for them to break out of that habit, especially because Edward would always be the one who holds more power in their relationship by virtue of the fact that he is wealthy with a capital W, clearly has more social capital than she does, and also most importantly, Vivian herself is pretty isolated. And before you say, what do you mean by isolated, Noria, please cast your mind back to Vivian's life as at when we end the film. From the dialogue that she shares, we know that she had a tumultuous home life and doesn't have such a good relationship with her mother, and the only person who she seems to be somewhat close to throughout the entirety of the film is Kit, another sex worker. Are you trying to tell me that if anything goes south, Kit has the wherewithal to help Vivian in some way? And no, I'm not saying that Edward would be physically abusive to Vivian in any way. Like, the movie never gives out any hints that that is the type of person that Edward is. What instead it could do is be financially abusive towards her. There is a wealth disparity between them after all, and this does not necessarily have to be driven by Edward's desire to be vindictive or anything. Just the way he handled his breakup with Jessica, his last girlfriend, is enough. That casual insistence on her having her things cleaned out of the shared apartment shows that should things go south, Edward would always be the one in the position of power in his relationships. And before you say yes, Vivian noticed that, which is why she didn't want him to put her up in a condo and didn't want to upend her life to be with him when he tried setting her up in a fashion as his mistress slash LA boutique hall. I would say that she turned that down, yes, but the film never did specify what their relationship would look like now that he's willing to be fully emotionally committed to her. Is it the same arrangement except now he tells her he loves her when they hang up on the phone? Is he going to move to LA to be with her? If he is, would he move her to be in with him? Especially considering the fact that Vivian has given up her part of the apartment so she can go back to school, and Kate was talking to another of the sex workers while she too is busy making plans to go to beauty school. Like, call me jaded and cynical, and you might be right in that regard, but I'm still of the opinion that by virtue of Edward's wealth and Vivian's lack of it, that imbalance in their relationship would always be present. They would most likely move in together at some point, and it would be a place that Edward would most likely pay for, which means that should anything happen in their relationship that leads to them breaking up, Vivian would be right smack dab in the middle of Jessica's experience, having to clean up her life in their shared apartment because that space, when you think about it, isn't hers. And like I said, Kit wouldn't be financially in the position to help her either because neither her nor Kit are on the same societal strata as Edward is. That's always been my problem with Cinderella as a fairy tale. The fact that unlike a lot of the others in the OG princess lineup, she is the only one who isn't a royal and doesn't have those protections as she marries up to be with the prince. Snow White is a princess, Sleeping Beauty is a princess, Ariel is a princess, Jasmine is a princess. Sure, Belle isn't a princess, but the Beast didn't have that much social capital over her, considering the fact that the townsfolk were quite willing to have him killed at the end. He was ostracized from the town and didn't have the power over the people like the other royals did. And then, of course, there's Cinderella, who, like I said, isn't a princess. That's something I've always been a bit worried about with regards to that fairy tale, even more so with regards The fairy tale as it applies to sex workers like Vivian who are already discriminated against and whose society doesn't apply protections for or to with regards the work they do and the industry that they are in. So there is the social capital of Edward, there is his wealth, and there is the respectability attached to his work as compared to Vivian's. And all of that makes for a troubling state of affairs should their relationship ever end. Because Vivian's past is something that would always be present in their relationship. It would hang like the sword of Damocles over it. They can never speak the truth about how they met, otherwise she would be scorned by the rest of Edward's society. And before you say that, well, nobody would know, I would like to point to the piece of shit lawyer, Philip, that Edward spilled the beans to because he cannot keep his bloody mouth shut. And sure, he apologized afterwards, but there is no telling what Philip would do. They all move in the same circles after all, and Vivian would eventually be brought fully into that part of Edward's world. So what happens when she does so? Do we think Philip, who has been shown to be petty and vindictive and scornful of Vivian's former work, do you think he would keep quiet? Especially after Edward's punch and their less than pleasant parting? Of course he would speak, and he would tell everyone. So that privacy of what she formerly did is not one she can maintain for long if she wants to stay with Edward. His very actions and the kind of people he has associated with would make that impossible for her. And so for the entirety of their relationship, those little slights will continue to creep in, unless, of course, Edward decides to step away from it all and never interact with those people again. But we know that that would be impossible because that is what he does for a living. Those are the people he works with, closes deals with. And then there's the bit with her changed wardrobe and being, which brings us to the Pygmalion part of the story, or My Fair Lady, for those who don't know of the myth or the George Bernard Shaw play and instead saw the film with Audrey Hepburn. Because I think recognizing the influence of both Cinderella and Pygmalion on the movie is important, as it subtly gives us a hint into what Vivian's possible future could be, and it does not look good. You see, a core part of Pygmalion's story is the fact that Eliza falls into the uncomfortable position where she isn't actually highbrow, though Higgins's training might have passed her off as one, but she's also now too well trained to return to her lowbrow roots, just like her father laments the fact that he's been unwittingly pulled into the middle class due to Higgins's actions. And so she can't go back to where she was and can't pretend to be what she's not, as she would eventually be seen through. And so she's stuck, which in turn is what leads her back to Higgins in the play and in the film as well, if you read between the lines. And I see this unfortunately applying to Vivian as well. She can't be a sex worker anymore, and we see her actively deciding to go back to finish school. But she also can't completely fit into Edward's world like the other women that are present in it, no matter how she might pretend. There is still a Philip in the eaves waiting to drop that information at a time when it would hurt her and her acceptance by high society the most. And so the question remains, where does that leave her then? It's a conundrum of a situation, because when you consider this plus the imbalance in her relationship with Edward from a financial perspective, what we then have is a situation that would see her stuck in her relationship with Edward, where he holds all the power and all the cards. And I don't know about you, but the thought of that terrifies me. But of course, that is just me. It is possible that you read the film completely differently and believe that I'm doing way too much and reading way too much into things. That is perfectly fine as well. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've enjoyed what I had to say so far. Share it if you want. Check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. And I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.